Thanks everybody for attending our really the fifth long-range facility planning meeting for Silver Falls School District. And you know, we got a lot of really great, valuable input last time and the time before. And so we're really looking forward to tonight and sharing with you some kind of initial findings as it relates to educational adequacy and just some observations as it relates to enrollment and then some contemporary learning environments. So I believe everybody at this point has been introduced to Richard Higgins, my partner up there in at least my upper left-hand corner. And Richard was at the last meeting, and we are looking forward to meeting with you tonight. Also on the call is Angela Crook. There you are. I see you. So we'll go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, we're going to look at the agenda here. We're going to go through really quite a bit of information and get some kind of thoughts and feedback as we go with some group exercise. For those of you that were part of our last meeting, we kind of tried a couple different things. We tried doing a small group exercise with breakout rooms in the beginning, and we ended with more of a large group exercise in the end. And we felt like the large group exercise was much more effective in facilitation and just getting input from everybody. You know, our technology was a little bit challenged at that time. So that's, I think, how we'll facilitate these group exercises here. So on the agenda, we'll go over schedule again. We presented this last time, but it's always a good reminder of kind of where we're at in the process. We'll also look at contemporary learning environments as it relates to, you know, what are people doing nowadays? How is that different from, you know, when some of these schools were built, and also just kind of understanding some of the brain research that goes behind those contemporary learning environments. From there, we'll break into that large group exercise, and then we'll go into a real short snippet of an educational adequacy progress report. We shared last time with you that we would be meeting with site-based committees at each individual school, and we've had really great feedback from 4 schools thus far, and so we want to share a little bit of that with you. We also want to look at, as I mentioned, enrollment and capacity analysis based on the PSU study that was conducted a couple of years ago, and just kind of offer some observations, if you will, and thought, but more importantly, to really get a better understanding from your perspective, some of the trends that we're seeing there that will help guide this long-range facility planning process. And with that, we'll roll into our last group exercise and then call it a night after that. And so let's go ahead and get started here. So schedule, you'll see that coming up here in just a second here. So where we are in the process, for those of you who were not at our last meeting, this has been fleshed out a little bit to just kind of give an outline of where we are and where we see ourselves going forward. Now, these schedules, while we like to stay with the schedule, sometimes they augment a little bit depending on kind of what we learn and how we gather information. But basically, the cliff notes are, we're in our long-range facility planning meeting number 5 here in June now. We'll be talking about some of the items that I just outlined. We will not be talking today about an equity discussion just yet. We feel like we need to get more information from the educational adequacy assessments. So as I mentioned, you know, the schedules will kind of flux a little bit, but we will address that at an upcoming meeting. At this juncture, we will break for the summer, and we will be doing our work internally, Richard, Angela, and myself, and also with the site-based committees that will meet with us during the summer to finish out those educational adequacy assessments, but also to really go and review all of the sites. We've learned a lot about them just through some of the site-based committees, but also from the facility assessments. But nothing beats just seeing it firsthand. So we'll be doing that this summer. We'll be looking at some of the historic buildings, if you will, to determine whether or not they meet the threshold for a historic property. That's part of an ODE requirement. So we'll be doing our due diligence there during the summer. When we come back for that 6th meeting, we'll be presenting some of the highlights that we've learned at each site, and then present a more holistic picture of the instructional or educational adequacy, and then start kind of looking at some exploration opportunities leading up into December, where we anticipate having a recommendation to the school board and presenting our draft of that long-range facility plan. Coming back in January with a refined plan to the school board, and then in February for final approval. Those dates are important because it'll set us up for success for the ultimate bond measure, which is anticipated for November of 2021, barring any unforeseen conditions at this point. But part of the reason why it would want to be in November in lieu of next spring is that we would
your whole
we would
you're always interfering with my computers,
Angela,
sort of thing.
Angela, I think you need there.
And then so basically ODE has requirements for when the long-range facility plan is due, and also for the Awesome Grant. And for those of you that are not aware, the Awesome Grant is a state match program through Oregon where we would qualify for some funding, and if we're able to get that funding, that will really help in that bond measure for building the project, but also for messaging.
Jonah, if I could interject.
Yeah, absolutely.
No surprise to anybody on the line, but there is a plethora of presentations online about moving forward with next fall and what is the impact in COVID-19. And since it's all such new territory, we're going to as many of these Zoom presentations as we possibly can to compile as much good information. So quite candidly, the summer is going to give us the opportunity to collect some of that data and give feedback. I know that superintendents and athletic coaches are all just really wringing their hands as to what it's going to look like. And so if you will be patient with us, we're going to go back to school this summer.
Thanks, Richard.
Who's another guy that works for the
so jumping into the contemporary learning environment discussion, we talked about this a little bit in meetings past about how we would broach the subject. It's something that we do like to talk about kind of in the beginning of a long-range facility planning process, because it really lends itself to an understanding of kind of what's out there, what are environments that are supporting more 21st century learning, and then just to see if this is the right fit for Silver Falls School District. Not every learning environment is the right fit for every district, but this really kind of gets you to start thinking about what's out there that you may or may not be aware of. So bear with us as we go through this. There's quite a bit of information, but we'll try to get through it fairly quickly. And I know that some of this was probably many of you already know, but when we look at learning environments now, BLRB Architects has been around since the 50s, since schools were really designed like the upper left-hand corner and instruction was delivered that way. And, instruction and education has been delivered in kind of what you'd think of as the industrial model, or what some people have quoted as the cells and bells approach. It's essentially, you are this kind of vessel that is waiting to be filled with knowledge, and you go into the classroom and you have a teacher that really instructs you kind of on a one-on-one basis, or actually one to many basis, and you're really kind of expected to retain that knowledge and be that vessel moving forward. So a lot of it's based on rote memorization and testing scores as they develop throughout the years. And no big surprise, things didn't really change a whole lot throughout the late 20th century. The 1960s looked very similar. And then in the 1970s, of course, we saw some augmentation of that with the open school concepts, which had the best intentions, but failed on a few different levels. I believe that you have one of those, kind of a small example of that with Robert Frost Elementary. But in the 1980s, this is kind of when I was going to school. That's very familiar. That looks very similar to my classroom. Again, just that the teacher at the front, really the sage on the stage there. What we've learned, and we don't pretend to be experts in this, but we do like this to really help us influence our design and really think about it, because at the end of the day, what we're developing is environments that are not just community driven and are landmarks for a but more importantly, they're places that are student centered and enhance student achievement. So in looking at Howard Gardner's concept of the multiple intelligences theory that he developed back in the 80s and early 90s, we've come to this understanding that not everybody learns in the same way. I learn quite a bit different than Richard learns, and quite a bit different than Angela learns. You know, I'm more of kind of a hands-on learner. I really have to do it to really kind of understand it. Whereas, you know, Richard's really a really great visual learner. He can kind of have, you know, see something and remember it and really have a fundamental understanding of it. Some people have to move around and are more kinesthetic learners. And so you kind of think about dancers as an example. They're really learning in their own way. And so we all really do learn in different ways. So how do you create environments that are conducive to that? If we buy into this theory that there are multiple intelligences and that we all learn in different ways, and extrapolate that even further on a lesson-based plan, you come to have an understanding that there's at least 20 learning modalities that have been identified in learning environments. And really the best environments that we're seeing at the moment that are the most successful for a broad range of students are these environments that are conducive to these different types of learning. And so we'll get a little bit more into the details here of what that means. But again, this is really kind of what we saw in that first diagram with the 4 images, that teacher-centered learning, that again, that sage on the stage concept where students are expected to stay awake and to learn everything. And we're trying to move from there to more of a student-centered learning. So where the student kind of serves more as the guide on the side, if you will. And there's different ways of learning and having engagement within the classroom. So thinking about personalization, large group, small group, and having the opportunity to flex between those two extremes. So if we buy into this concept and we look at our learning environments now, some of the more successful learning environments look more like this. You know, they have extended learning opportunities outside of classrooms. They have really good supervision outside of classrooms. They have peer-to-peer mentoring and teacher mentoring and lots of flexibility there. When we look at some of the attributes of successful contemporary learning environments from our experience in doing this, we find that there's quite a few of those that are quite applicable to just about any environment. And so obviously any new school or any school that is being modified, it really benefits for it to be a welcoming presence in the front. So everything from the site supervision and passive supervision down to just having covering and you know, a really kind of exciting space to move into and go to. But just, you know, we live in the Pacific Northwest, so lots of coverings is a good thing. You know, they're obviously safe and secure. Obviously, you know, even before kind of the reality of the last 20 years, it's always been really important that environments are safe and secure, and that students feel not just secure and safe while they're in the school, but also have this warmth. So, you know, you don't have to think about safe and secure as kind of a prison model, if you will, but it can be, have the ability to be locked down and have lots of ample passive supervision at the entry. This right here, you could see is one of those entry vestibules that dumps right into the main office. And these doors are locked after hours, so there's one point of entry into the building. I know that Silver Falls School District has that to some degree with cameras at the front of, I'm not sure if it's all the schools, but at least the ones that we've done the educational adequacy assessments so far, and you have to be buzzed in. So it's very similar to that. Again, going back to that transparency issue, you know, when we think about transparency, one of the first questions you get is, well, that doesn't look very safe, right? You know, I mean, what if somebody came in with all the intents in the world to do harm? But what we find is that most of your challenges and issues are not that kind of one-off, you know, unfortunate issue. They're more bullying, and they're more about, you know, parents picking up students when they shouldn't be, and they're more about students, you know, doing things in areas that they're not being supervised in. So having some transparency that's thoughtful and considerate is a really important attribute. Inspirational is, of course, something that we always aspire to do, something that creates a sense of pride and placemaking, something that maybe there's historical elements related to it, and, you know, whether it's in the community or the school itself, but these are elements that can help you wayfind in schools, especially larger schools where you want to try to maybe break down into smaller learning communities. And we'll get into a little bit more of that here in a minute. And then, of course, the most important thing is that they're student-centered, because at the end of the day, this is who we're designing for. It's for student achievement, it's for collaboration, it's for kids that just want to go to school and have those kind of breakout opportunities and to be social. And then, you know, I mentioned earlier the opportunities for extended learning, and that can really happen anywhere. And most schools do this to some degree, whether or not the environment is conducive to it. A lot of times you'll see, you know, chairs and tables right out in the hallway that's no wider than 8 feet, and it's, you know, borderline a fire code issue. We like to think about opportunities where whether the space may be needed for circulation, but maybe you widen it a little bit and think about those kind of extended learning opportunities that are easily supervised. That's actually in a basement, that last image there, but it's a very successful learning environment. This one really kind of expresses this desire and this need for 21st century learning to be collaborative in nature. You know, when we think about who we hire at BLRB Architects, that's really one of the most important elements to anybody that we hire, is their ability to collaborate with different people from different backgrounds, people with different skill sets, and being collaborative in nature. And then flexible and agility are important elements we're seeing. Again, you know, sometimes people look at elements like this and they kind of cringe because they think about, again, the open school concept that's flawed in some ways because they never took into consideration STC ratings or the sound coefficient between rooms. And now, you know, these flexible learning environments, we're getting these walls that have STC ratings that are better than regular walls in some cases. So having that ability to open up and flex into different learning environments, and understanding that some of these environments obviously are not going to stay the same as they were intended to stay. So this image is an example where these kids are here. You know, this room has changed so many times because it was flexible in that it was allowed to do that. So, you know, I've walked in there and it was a museum at times, a traveling museum. It's been a STEM center at times. It's been, you know, just a place where kids throw clay and do digital media. And so just having that flexibility and agility and thinking about that. Personalization, and when we think about personalization, there's, you know, the obvious personalization with students and artwork and really kind of creating an environment that's their own, or that's the teachers or educators. But we also think about personalization as different scales. So, you know, really having kind of large group instruction coupled with small group instruction and having the ability to kind of close those areas off. So if the student needs more one-on-one mentoring, they can go into a small group room, or it can be used for a variety of functions. You know, of course, pride, again, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but really thinking about, you know, what does pride mean for a school? And it's different, you know, it's different for different age groups. It's different for different locales, you know, it's different for different districts. It's, you know, but really getting to the bottom of what is it about that school that creates a sense of pride. This is a rendering of Gresham High School, where they have a pretty good athletic program that's developed over the years. And so part of taking down parts of the old school was retaining the bleachers and using those as kind of elements for athletic achievements and things like that. And then of course, social and emotional learning. You know, one of the most important attributes to successful learning environments is this, in creating an environment where students can not just learn through, you know, their mind, but also socially, and really understanding kind of their place in the world and how to work with groups and really how to become well-adjusted and you know, understanding that they're in a safe environment. And then of course, community. Community is a really important attribute, and just about every school has some semblance of community, whereas whether they lend out the gym for after-school activities, or, you know, they share parks with their local park department, or like this one again, Gresham High School, you know, they have a very robust performing arts center, and that's something that's been a really big part of who they are. So we wanted to share that with the city there. Spaces that are conducive to project-based learning, you know, in STEM and STEAM and, you know, even STREAM, you know, if that's kind of what you really believe is important. This one here is actually a project that we did over on the East Coast. It's in Pittsburgh, and it really ties in manufacturing with art and with robotics and with Project Lead the Way and with a plethora of other options. And so this is actually how you circulate through to the different programs. It's through this integrated manufacturing lab, and really kind of thinking about project-based learning in that sense. Art-based learning, again, very similar to project-based learning, but having those spaces that encourage students to learn in that way. And then play-based learning, you know.
Josh, we can't see your
right?
screen.
You can't see my screen?
No, we can see it. I can see it.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I can see it as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So those are kind of some attributes, and that's a lot of attributes. There's more, you know, there's some that are more important to districts and communities, you know, but those are some parallels that we see between a lot of different districts. If we go into kind of looking at learning environment organizations, you know, we start thinking about those attributes a little bit, and then really kind of starting to break down large scale projects into what we like to call small learning communities, if that's appropriate for a district. You know, we found in our experience thus far with Silver Falls, there's a lot of pride in these small K-8 schools. And a lot of that has to do with community. It has to do with autonomy. It has to do with, just really knowing who you're growing up with and who you're a part of. And so, you can still have that kind of environment in a larger setting by breaking down in what we call small learning communities. Again, this isn't a right size fits all, and it's not the right approach for everybody, but this is one opportunity to do something like that.
So, Jonah, there is a question. Typically, do you see the attributes changing the overall footprint of the school?
That's a really great question. Absolutely. It really depends on that. So obviously, when it comes to safety and security and transparency and kind of the approach to a school, that will change what your front door looks like and how people approach the school, how they get into the school, how they get into the office. So that's one element. When you look at flexibility, adaptability, agility, and you look at collaboration and extended learning opportunities, it absolutely changes what the footprint of the school looks like. So when I kind of mentioned earlier, this idea of the cells and bells approach, it's what we've all kind of become accustomed to over the years. It's really that double loaded corridor that is anywhere from 8 to 12 feet if it's generous. And you essentially go into one classroom, the bell rings, you go into your next classroom, and then the bell rings, and then you kind of leave. If you buy into this notion that we should be looking at extended learning opportunities, it really changes the footprint of those learning communities. So you may be adding more square footage to, say, a learning commons in this example, so the number 4 here, but you may be taking a little bit of square footage out of the classrooms to help make that up. Or you go into it knowing that you're going to have more square footage for students than you would in a kind of a more traditional approach. Now,
here in a second, watch.
Why?
Now that happens to just in the reality of today with kind of just COVID-19 and social distancing, that happens to be good practice. That wasn't why this was developed, but that's kind of a tangential relationship that is a good thing. So here's, you really have a grade level grouping. You have, 4 classrooms as an example. You have a science classroom that allows for interdisciplinary learning. And Richard, please stop me if questions do come up because I'm not watching the chat.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't. I got your back. I do have a comment though.
Yeah.
So does it change the overall footprint? One of these attributes are really can be integrated into existing schools, and that's some of the work that we're currently doing, whether it's a secured vestibule, whether it's creation of a commons where students can congregate. The schools in which our students are currently located were really built under a different model. But that doesn't mean we can't make adjustments and accommodations to at least get to those critical elements. So you're not limited just to a new school is where I wanted to go. You can make adjustments and adaptations to existing schools.
Having gone through the process of like what we're going through right now, and then getting into a bond measure and then a design phase and then construction, I can tell you that as I look back over those years of when we did some construction in Scappoose, the design elements and attributes that we were talking about in meetings just like this completely 100% drove the design of the building. And that's part of the process that gets built in. That's why it's so important for us to be getting to know Jonah and Richard, and for them to be getting to know us, because down the line we'll be actually making decisions about, well, what would this building, if we were going to build something, what would it actually look like? And they'll remind us, hey, remember when you said you wanted these commons areas, but yet you also wanted to have clear visibility for security. Well, we need to design with those principles in mind, and that's why this part of the conversation is really super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more there, Paul. It's really important to just kind of foundationally look at these opportunities and to really vet out whether or not these are applicable. And I think
to this day, if I walk through that school that we built, I can just walk down the hallway and say, those beams are there because of a conversation between these three people, and here's a photograph of them talking about it, and now it looks like this now. And did you know that the music room is over here because of the conversations we had with these people based on these attributes and principles that were important to us? It's fascinating to go to watch the architects turn our conversations into actual buildings. So 100% it can and actually does and should drive the footprint and the whole design of a project.
Yeah. And I mean, this, not to dwell on this example too long, but, one of the things that we looked at with this group was, does it make sense to consider what's called an L-shaped classroom? Again, this was a very non-traditional approach, but it was kind of precipitated by this particular district's desire to have all kinds of learning modalities within the classroom itself, not just in the learning commons, but you could think of an L-shaped classroom. What it allows you to do here is it allows you to have a small group, kind of over here. You can have a small group over here, and you can have a group over here, and students all have their own corners. Again, not the right approach for every district. And candidly, an L-shaped classroom will cost more than just a regular traditional classroom. But if that is something that's important, that's something you may want to look at. Similarly, this is a little bit different than your traditional approach, because you think about departmentalization a lot of times, where you have a science wing as an example. Whereas, here they want to look more interdisciplinary learning, where the science can be coupled with another science room and share a science prep. So there is some departmentalization between these two science teachers, but they're also able to push out into the learning community as well, in their respective learning communities, and then they stack.
So there is a question. Jenna. Does this mean the basic footprint is large open spaces that are divided by movable partitions?
Not necessarily, not all the time. Actually, this
by the way,
here
Jenna,
is
my written answer started the same way, so go for it, my man.
No, this is actually a perfect example right here. A lot of those same attributes. This is actually an elementary school that's being constructed right now in Kalama, Washington. And, there's a learning commons here, which is a large open space that allows for extended learning. It's about a classroom and a half is the size of it. But there are no movable partitions here. They really said, we want traditional classrooms. We want smaller traditional classrooms, but a larger extended learning space outside of that classroom. And, we don't really want movable walls, except for in spaces like the commons and gym, and then in just one room kind of thing. So it really depends on the needs of the school and the needs of the community and how they want to use that facility. But this is very similar to that. You've got a media center in the center here that's kind of really in the center of the building. It's a 3-story building, but you break off into small learning communities here. This is actually a very large elementary school, but it doesn't feel like it when you're in there, because you are kind of in a community with 100 to 120 of your best friends, hopefully. And that's kind of where you stay for the most part, outside of going out to the gym and to the common space, and music and things like that. So on any of these, if you see, just so you know, if you're curious, these QR codes, in your screen may not be large enough. If it is, try scanning those if you want to kind of look in those spaces. There is some interactive elements on your phone, and we'll also be sending this out, so don't feel pressure to do it right now. But so, again, very similar here. This is the same district. It's a middle school. It's actually a smaller middle school than their elementary school. They have one elementary school, one middle school. and they wanted this more interdisciplinary approach as well. So they wanted a science classroom that was able to push into the learning commons, have teacher planning, so lesson plans can happen here, teachers can collaborate with one another, but there could be conferences going on here. There's also a small group room over here for that one-on-one, I'm sorry, right here, for that one-on-one instruction. A lot of times if we buy into this kind of organizational model, we'll want bathrooms there as well. So student restrooms and staff restrooms there as well. So if we just go back really quick here, this is a perfect example at the elementary school. You know, the students don't have to leave here. They can use the restroom here. They have small group here. They have extended learning opportunities here, and then they have their classroom. So the beauty of this is, while it's creating a small learning community where it's kind of more focused on the individual and smaller learning, this is a grade level grouping. It's also more secure for a lockdown. So in the event that you do have a lockdown, and say something is going on and you have an intruder at the front door, there are 6 double doors that lock this entire facility down, and you're able to shelter in place, or depending on the protocol of the district or the school, or escape out very easily here. So there's a double benefit to clustering kind of in these small learning communities if they're designed well.
Speaking of clustering, we're probably going to start hearing about the word cohort. That's going to be a driving factor for how we open school in the fall. We're going to get more guidance on that starting tomorrow, but expect to be hearing more about cohorts. And a cohort could be just like Jonah was describing, a cluster.
Perfect.
In a bubble.
Yeah. Richard
hey,
had
Jonah,
mentioned. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you know, can you enlarge your pointer? Is there any way you can enlarge it?
I'm sure I can.
Yeah, give it a look.
Know.
Give it a look.
Let's see here. Yeah, I don't know. Drew, you may know how I can do that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that on Bluebeam.
Yeah, let's figure it out for next time. It's a good suggestion. I've struggled with that in Zoom meetings as well. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Richard, you mentioned earlier about existing facilities and being able to adapt into those facilities. Again, not to keep bringing up Kalama, but this is their high school, and we have they wanted, as part of their high school program, some upgraded science, but then they wanted to look at it. We helped them acquire a grant in addition to their bond funding for science and technology for their STEM grant. So we were able to develop this 3rd floor that's in construction right now. And this is a historic building. This is a 1930s building. I'm sure all of you have seen the movie Twilight, but this is that building in that first movie. But it's historic in nature, and their 3rd floor here, this is actually an 88 edition, which we readapted. It was a library here over on this side, which we readapted to science and robotics and flex classroom, and having that kind of learning commons in between there. So those are kind of some of the more, if you will, core curriculum type learning environments, but also you want to look at the community-based environments, the design-based environments, the storytelling, if you will, media centers. We saw a picture of this earlier with those kids that were in this classroom right here, and the walls that were open and closed. Well, this particular district, again, another historic building. This was a 1906 building by an architect named Frederick Heath that we updated and modernized, but we also added additions too. And what was really important to them was having this really forward-thinking media center that can serve as a library, a traditional library, but also can serve as research for designing and having flexible kind of clean space for art projects, for digital media, but also be coupled with Dirty over here with a kiln and art projects, but be divisible by a wall. And as I mentioned, you know, this project here is about 5 or 6 years old, and every time I go there, they're using these spaces for something different. And that was the intent, you know, that there was not a designated program for these spaces. They flexed from being a classroom, you know, when they were over capacity at times, to, again, being the traveling museum. This actual, this is becoming a little bit outdated nowadays, is more of an enclosed library workspace. But they wanted a more enclosed library workspace. And the last time I visited this school, this was actually a STEM, you know, they adapted this space for robotics. And so it's kind of interesting to see that. But, you know, it has really good flexibility in being able to go outside, have student garden areas. They could bring all the produce inside, wash it. So there's some culinary aspects to it as well. Same project, but on the other side. Again, this is probably not too new to most people, but this idea of being able to open up into larger venues using a combined gymnasium and common space. You could actually see right here when we had the grand opening here for this tiny little school on the north side of Tacoma, there was over 900 people in attendance in this space here. That's kind of how beloved this was in the community. But we also opened up this area, so we actually had people flowing outside watching everything from out here in, and this just gets used in so many different ways and really honors that historical legacy of the school. You saw that image earlier of the historic building on the inside of the social and emotional learning slide with the tables. That's this one. And what we did was we just enclosed it with glass essentially and then added onto it. So I know that was like a lot of information. I probably went over on my time. You know, I could talk about that all day long, so I apologize. But I thought that it might be good for us to, you know, really get a better understanding of Silver Falls School District. And a lot of these things that I've talked about and mentioned, they're not for every district. Everybody's different, and you know, we pride ourselves in when we develop solutions and really custom tailoring them to a district's needs. And so we'd like to open up a question there, and I do see that there's some chat here, which Richard may have answered some of this.
I was answering a comment in the chat room. Yeah, okay. So the question, the question was, I'd be interested to see some data on some of the schools that have bought into the design idea and rebuilt their schools for modern design and analyzed differences in ongoing costs and upkeep related to those changes. For example, clean glass windows, changes in heating and cooling for open spaces, etc. So I don't know if you want to tackle it now, but I think that's something we could address in more detail with a little bit of for the next meeting. Let's address that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good question. And just the sorry, go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say it's interesting that school districts learn so much as they move forward. For instance, the one that we see an example of this is that many schools are now going to polish concrete floors in lieu of vinyl composition tile. And in the summers, instead of the janitorial staff polishing floors all summer, they actually can do other exercises, and the cleaning of the floors is much easier. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm just giving that as a kind of an example of some of the ways that you actually can reduce the maintenance on it. Mechanical system. So anyway, it was Dave who asked the question. You're up on my screen here, but there's a lot of give and take, and we'll put together a short analysis of that, because you ask a bunch of good questions. There's a lot of different answers.
Yeah, no, and those are really good questions, Dave, and really important ones. And part of the, just so you know, part of the process that we go through when we develop projects post-bond, when it becomes a project, is what's called a life cycle cost analysis. And so we evaluate all of those things, right? So like there's the initial cost investment, and you know, what's the payoff associated with that cost investment? You know, sometimes the payoff is immediate, sometimes it's longer, and sometimes districts don't care as much about the payoff, you know, because for whatever reason. But so that is something that we do. As far as the empirical data as it relates to teaching and learning, and what I can offer is that a lot of our colleagues and us are starting to do more of those analysis with what's called post-occupancy evaluations, and really getting more empirical data as it relates to that. Because candidly, a lot of it has been, to this point, anecdotal, if you will. So it's more, you go in a year or two down the road, you ask the principal or the teachers, you know, about their space, and they love it. You know, it works well for them. That first example I shared with the axon of Chartiers Valley School District is the middle school over in Pittsburgh. I just went there in December. We had our ribbon cutting, and for the overall project, the middle school had been open for well over a year at that point, and that district had chronic issues with absenteeism and kids just not coming to class. And they went from, it was like an abysmal number. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was pretty bad, to almost zero absenteeism. And a big part of that was the way that learning environment was structured. For whatever reason, it works well for that district. And so we just find that a lot of times they just, you know, they just really love their if it's designed well and with really good input, they love those learning environments. And then, as Richard mentioned, we can get into more of that at the next meeting. I think that's a really good question. And then I want to address the COVID change the way we think about classroom sizes. That's a really good question there, Josh. And the simple answer to that is, Paula mentioned about cohort and kind of what that's going to look like moving forward, and the coming weeks knowing more about that. And you know, what I can say about, you know, the actual right now with what we're looking at, it's all, we're all kind of adapting at the moment. So these learning environments, the way that we've shown them, part of the outcome, unintended, you know, at this, you know, from our standpoint at the moment, was that they are more conducive to social distancing, because they have larger learning environments and more thoughtful arrangements. So the school that we're opening up in Kalama, the elementary school, they essentially will be able to open this up with no issues at all, because they're able to social distance in a way that, okay, well, we can have students at the learning commons, and we can have students in the classroom, we can have, you know, so it's really building in that adaptability and flexibility for, I mean, who would have known that COVID was going to be a thing just 6 months ago? So, so at this point, you know, I think we can tell you about what we think about all of that, and you know, of course, we've got opinions, and you know, kind of what we've done in the past. Okay, here we go. But we'd really like to understand what you think about what we've presented. You know, what does 21st century learning look like for Silver Falls School District? You know, and then we'll have a follow-up question here. What attributes are most important for contemporary learning environments from your perspective? And I mentioned, you know, we had this kind of Miro thing last time, and we had mixed success with it in the first group exercise. You know, we're always learning and adapting. But I think, you know, now what we'll do is, between Angela, myself, and Richard, you know, we'll capture thoughts here. And, you know, Angela and Richard will be watching the chat to kind of incorporate that. So if you don't feel comfortable speaking up in a large group, but just want to add it to the chat, go ahead and do that. But other than that, let's see, I think I had about maybe about 10 minutes for this exercise. So this is really just kind of a popcorn session. What does 21st century learning look like for Silver Falls School District?
You know, Jonah, what we've learned in our educational or what I've learned in our educational adequacy discussions with some of the out-of-town schools is those schools find, those communities, those schools find what is unique to their school, and they build upon it. A drama program, a CTE program, so I guess what does contemporary learning look like? It's adaptive to what is important to those communities and what they find as valuable. So we don't suggest one thing fits all, but I think in the case of the schools that we've talked to, they're finding what's important, and the teachers of the communities are building upon it. So I guess from what I've learned, what I'm trying to say is no one thing fits all, but it is a collaborative process to determine what is best. I guess I want to use the word collaborative in there somewhere just to get us going. There's a comment about melding of agriculture and technology. We recently did a program space at Liberty High School that is sustainable design and agriculture. And I think that is one form of melding agriculture and technology. That it was directed by science teachers who were also providing curriculums in physics and also just life science. But that program attracted kids both in many socioeconomic stratas. And of course, Hillsborough has a reputation for some of the agriculture out to their west. And even those kids were very interested in participating. So it was all over the place. And again, the school district had the wherewithal and the insight to kind of develop that. Look at that, they're coming in like hotcakes now. So let's pick one of these. Just need a little prime in the pump.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to catch one of these down here at the bottom. Let me move my screen. I was cheating. I have my chat up in my other screen, and that's where I'm trying to create Post-its. So,
Could you share what the second question was again?
Yeah. And there's no order to this. So if you want to answer the second question,
Here we go.
What attributes are most important for a contemporary learning environment? So there's definitely some crossover between these two questions. So feel free to to add to any of those. I think what's interesting about I see the comment, the Starbucks style seating arrangement. One thing we didn't talk about really in our presentation was the importance of furniture and having different kinds of seating arrangements and opportunities for that. Because again, some students, they prefer a more rigid desk and they want to work at a desk, whereas some students would rather sit in a beanbag, as an example, and they learn better there and they're able to collaborate better in that environment. So, we actually, for the projects in Pittsburgh, we actually developed a cafe for each grade level grouping. So each learning environment had a cafe area that had a refrigerator, a sink, and even vending. So it kind of allowed for that flexibility there.
So the no flat roofs reference is a good one, and it unfortunately post-World War II baby boom generated a lot of very cheap and flat roof buildings all across the state of Oregon. You see schools built in the late 50s, early 60s, and the reason they are that way is because they were cheap, and there was this new technology where we didn't need sloped roofs. We could do it in flat. Well, there's another trend that just really didn't pan out. It just, we still don't have great technology for perfectly flat roofs.
Yeah. No, we don't.
I wrote that one, but as I hit enter on the keyboard, I thought that's probably not what we're looking for. We should be talking about 21st century learning, not what the physicality of the building is.
Yeah, but so, it's okay because it's we're spitballing.
Exactly. I like this small class size is important to everyone. Yeah, that's something that we find is really important.
So we have talked to enough of the out-of-town schools that well, I beg your pardon. We're looking forward to talking to more, but the whole small class size commentary is spot on. And the teachers in those schools have so much agility to teach more than one subject. And I think you're going to be interesting to see what we come up with the capacity analysis, because we're analyzing the school's capacity based on ideal size or the target size for the school district as a whole, not just in-town, out-of-town schools. So that's a good measure of what is what is the capacity of those schools and where are they relative to the total number of students. And I think you'll be surprised. So we have that for tonight.
Oh, this is great. This ability to have two classes join together. When we think about classrooms as a kind of a regular, typical classroom, we like to really kind of think about changing the wording a little bit and thinking more of a learning studio. So the classroom itself is conducive to different kinds of activities in addition to lecture style. But then when you look at grouping two learning studios together and have the ability to open up between those, we like to think of that as more of like a learning suite. So having the opportunity to have large group instruction and kind of that cross-pollination between the schools and those classrooms. And again, it's amazing what these operable walls nowadays, how well they work if designed properly. That's something that we will never cheap out on because, too many architects learn the wrong way about how bad operable walls can be. So while you're kind of doing that, Angela and Richard, I'm going to move over to the next question. What attributes are most important for contemporary learning environments? And I think, really kind of, there's probably a lot of these can just be directly applicable to over here. So if there's something specific that we want to include over here, we will. Otherwise, I'll just give ourselves maybe another 2 minutes here before we move on. This is really, really great feedback here.
You know, we did hear a lot of conversation about dedicated space for music. So we will want to address that. So thank you.
Air-conditioned learning space. I like it.
I just about lost my job when we were designing Otto Peterson Elementary School in Scappoose over air conditioning, because I was insisting on it. I've been some banging of fists on tables because I felt so strongly about it, and we ended up getting air conditioning in the classrooms.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be definitely a hot topic, that's for sure. And fresh air, of course, is really important.
Yes.
Reading pods in quiet spaces, I really like that. We like to think about those opportunities in media centers, in classrooms as well. Actually, that Kalama Elementary School, they're known as the Chinooks. You know, not officially, the high school is the Chinooks, so they've always called themselves the Nooks for short. So we created Nooks for Nooks to read books in the library, and that's actually getting built right now. So I'm pretty excited about that there. So, well, this was really great feedback. And just like we did last time, we're going to collect all of these. These are all really good comments, and you know, I think just completely in tune with really quality contemporary learning environment. So thank you for that. And feel free to keep peppering that as we move on to the next portion of the presentation. We'll make sure that we capture everything. Okay. Okay, so promised you that we would talk about educational adequacy and where we are with their progress there. I will turn it over to Richard for this portion here. If you want to talk about this, Richard.
Sure. So this is just a rundown of why we're doing it. First and foremost, it is a requirement of the ODE requirements for the long-range facility planning, and ultimately that qualifies you for the AWESOME grant. Oregon School Capital Improvement Match Grant. Excuse me. The reassessment is really not about how, it is a reflection of how the built environment supports your teachers and students in their teaching and learning instruction. We have several data points. It's actually an expanded matrix that we developed based on the guidance of ODE. And what we're finding is it's a really great opportunity for us to engage with almost every school, well, with every school and as many teachers and administrators as we possibly can. It always starts out kind of clunky, but once we start getting clear on what the objective is and what we're looking for, we really build up some momentum, and it becomes a dialogue, and we learn so much about the school. So we really appreciate the time with these site-based committees. So far, we've been able to talk with Scotts Mills, Robert Frost, Butte Creek, and Victor Point. They're smaller schools, so we could do the entire school in about an hour and a half. As we get into the middle school and the high school, those are going to be more complex because we like to talk to the entire staff or make contact with the entire staff. So obviously we can't do that in an hour and a half, and there's different departments and different areas of the curriculum. So those are going to be really exciting, but we're really missing some. We would really like to schedule these opportunities to go through the matrix with Bethany Charter School, Central Howell, the Community Root School, Evergreen, Mark Twain, and the Proughton School. So anybody on the committee who has representatives with those schools or connections, please, please, please give us the opportunity to meet with you at your school and your administrators via Zoom. It's pretty straightforward. Has anybody participated, like Lisa, who might be wanting to kind of shed a little bit of light on your personal experience? Okay.
Hey, Richard, I was glad you brought that up because I can say that I represent Evergreen as my 3 kids, and now just my daughter still goes there. Do you want this to be maybe scheduled for now, or what would you like the schedule to be? And would you like to just be kind of like an open forum, just invite all comers from the school, or what's your thoughts on that?
So the way we've been doing it is Paul sent out an invite to the administrators at the schools to set up a time. We've been meeting with administrators and staff, and they're the ones that are in the building living in every space, and we go through in detail every space. The open forum would be a little bit cumbersome, but it would be better than not getting the input at all. So we would really like to get the principal and the teachers, and it's a pretty straightforward matrix, and we're going to look at it real briefly. So we'd like to do it now.
How long the conversation do you think would take with that group? And it's hard. I'm asking this because we're coming to the end of the school year now, as of today.
Right.
So,
hour and a half.
Yeah.
Hour and a half. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we've gotten through them in an hour as well for some of the schools. It really, honestly, it kind of depends on the school. Some take up the whole hour and a half, and we go through the educational adequacy. So some have gone for an hour, but then they have a lot of follow-up questions that are unrelated, which has been a really great opportunity for us to share kind of what we've been doing with the long-range facility planning process. So,
yeah, thanks, Angela, for what you're doing there. Okay. So
I was on Victor Points, and I think it was good for all of us that were involved there. It was just good to go through each area of the school and really talk through what we're lacking, what's good, what's working. Yeah, it was really nice. Appreciate it.
And we appreciated getting to meet you because, there's 13, 14 schools, and we're going to tour them, but nobody's going to be present. So this is the example, and the biggest challenge is getting everybody comfortable with a scoring matrix of 0 to 2. I mean, there's not much flexibility, and it's very simple. If the condition, the learning environment is adequate, it's a 2. If it's marginally adequate, it works. It's not quite perfect, that it's a 1. But if it just doesn't work, that means it's inadequate and it needs immediate attention. So it's pretty simple when you start just boiling it down. We could make it as a 1 to 10, but you can imagine how much confusion that would create. And we get consensus. That's kind of what really drives this thing, is with everybody on the phone call with hand signals or just speaking up, we get to a consensus. And so I'll go through the basic sections, and we talked about this before, but we talk about the capacity of the school. Is everything big enough for what the intended use is? And we break it down into 2 areas: those core facilities, basic classrooms, special needs, the school office, the basics. Then we go into another category of the specialty programs. And this was where we began to realize that at Victor Point, I think it's a drama program. And at, boy, I'm gonna misquote, but there was another school had a CTE program at the elementary grade. We're trying to develop that. So we began to learn a lot about the programs and their specialty programs, just in pure size of space. Then we go into technology. Is there adequate connectivity? Then we talk about safety and security. Roll down there, Jonah, do you have the bottom of the sheet, or just have a half sheet?
You betcha I do.
All right, there you go. Thank you. Instructional aids, that's where it's storage for students and teachers and the furniture. Then we do talk about the physical characteristics. Is it dilapidated? And we didn't hear anybody saying it's dilapidated, but what are the condition of those spaces? Are they just old? Are they satisfactory? And then the learning environment. You talked about air conditioning previously. There was a lot of conversation about, kids can't learn if they're too hot or just too cold. So we go into the details, the indoor air quality. Do the windows open? Do the acoustics work? And then we do not forget the fact that every kid needs to be able to circulate around the school, accessibility. And then finally, we talk about a relationship of spaces. And in a small school, that's not as big a problem, but certainly it's a part of the element. So we go through this process. We score each one of these elements with the group, and we average it out over the 8 categories and give it a score. So in this case, the average score is 1.5. To us, that would suggest that it's somewhere between marginally adequate and adequate. So it's probably in pretty good shape, but it's only a score in what we look at. So if you look at where it's deficient, then you might want to find out, you might want to dwell on that piece of the project of the school. All right, thank you, Jonah. So here's a summary. Next slide is a summary of what we found so far. So Scotts Mills average score was a 0.9. Robert Frost a 0.4. Butte Creek 1.5. Victor Point 1.2. So it's a good comparison. These scores are generated by the teachers and administrators, and that's what's so important to us. Those people that live in the building. And it's just a reflection. It's a good metric so that you can look at where your schools are above and beyond the assessment of the physical condition that was just bricks and mortars and what's broken and so it takes it to another level. And this is a piece of the overall puzzle required by ODE. Are there questions about this, and would you like to participate?
I have a question.
Yes, Ray.
Could you just give us a brief indication? I'm just picking one here at random. Okay, I'm down number 6, learning environment. And so what, can you go back to the previous table? Yeah. So what conditions, attributes, whatever might be present to make Robert Frost at a 0.3 and Butte Creek at a 1.2? What produced that large difference? And then down the next one, Robert Frost is a 0 and Butte Creek is a 2 on relationship of spaces. So can you explain those numbers a little bit?
If I had the sheets, I could. So which school is this, Jonah?
This right here is Butte Creek as an example, and I can pull up. I'm going to pull up as you're talking through kind of some of those attributes there.
Okay, so
I'll pull up the spreadsheet.
Okay, so relationship to spaces was the 2. So proximity to shared spaces is loosely described as are all the spaces readily accessible? For instance, if the gym or cafeteria is over in the extreme corner and there's an isolated kindergarten on the other end of campus, or better yet, the special needs program, it might not be accessible. You have to travel a long way, or you might even have to travel outside. Those are the kind of things you run into. So that's where Butte Creek, let's go back, Jonah. Okay. That's relationship spaces. Thank you. Which one is this? Okay. So on relationship spaces down. So proximity to shared space, outdoor learning, they have an outdoor learning area in close proximity, good relationship to the classrooms. Buses in the parking areas are close by. They're not in a remote location. Pedestrian access wasn't applicable because nobody really walks into the school. So instead of scoring that positively or negatively, we just made it not applicable. And then access to playgrounds and field. They're immediately adjacent in to the classrooms and the cafeteria and PE spaces.
And if we go to Robert Frost as an example, these are some of the comments and feedback that we got from the group there.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see how these scored. And as Richard mentioned, you know, it is one of the biggest challenges is it's not a 1 through 5 or a 1 through 10 where you can have varying degrees. It's either adequate, it's marginally adequate, or it's totally inadequate. And so at Robert Frost, the teachers and administrators felt poor temperature throughout the year, and just the differential in temperature in each room was completely inadequate. And the windows not being operable and the doors having to be propped open for ventilation, causing safety concerns and possible intrusions into the spaces, being that inadequate from the natural ventilation standpoint. When you have daylighting, many of the classrooms at Robert Frost they don't have windows, and those windows, ones that do have windows, aren't operable. And then acoustics, you know, Robert Frost has kind of the 3 classrooms, if you will, that are all bundled together. And once upon a time, you know, had the operable walls that were not designed well. They had poor STC ratings, down transmission coefficients between classrooms. So these all kind of, you know, add up to that no accessible student restrooms. Of course, that makes it inadequate. Now, the thing that we're finding as we're going through these is there's a lot of parallels between the educational adequacy and the assessments that were done prior to our work with Silver Falls School District. So Robert Frost scored quite, you know, pretty low on the facility assessment. So there is some parallel there, especially when it comes to kind of the learning environment. These are a little bit more of the physical characteristics there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay. And you know, the goal, like we'll get all these pulled together, and we'll have a summary kind of each space in each school, and having a better understanding of those schools. And these, you know, these are not a reflection by any means of how education is done in the schools or people who are working in the schools. This is purely subjective, related to how does the learning environment itself, the walls and the windows, how are they conducive to learning in the classroom? So that's an important subtle distinction to make, I think.
Yeah. And if there's one thing,
can I jump in real quick?
Please.
Yeah.
I maybe missed it, but who filled this out again? Was it parents and teachers, or just teachers?
Teachers and administrators.
How many? Do you know? I mean, just out of curiosity. Like 3 from the building, or the whole, every member, every staff member?
Every staff member was invited, and I think the smallest group we had was 7. And that was, how many at Victor Point? It was like 7. I'm sorry.
We had 5.
Okay, 5.
And we had 2 staff, or, you know, like educational assistants, or myself, secretary, and then administrator, and a couple teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, oh, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Go ahead, it's Collins. Yeah.
Oh, I just said thank you. I was just curious.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah. No, we encourage the larger the group, the better, because it's a lot easier to get consensus. Believe it or not, even with a large group, it's pretty simple, just through visual cues.
Yeah. We have met with entire staffs of 30 at another elementary school, and we would love bigger crowds so that we get more input.
Have you guys had luck getting in touch with the Mark Twain building group?
Not yet. Paul, we sent out, you've sent out invitations twice, right?
I have, yeah. And I will I will remind Greg that this needs to happen ASAP.
I just think that that building probably needs your attention. And I also think that they were, you know, they pulled together a good little subcommittee. So I think they're interested in working with you. So you might just need a reminder.
Great.
Great. Thanks,
I signed
Elijah.
up for I signed up for the Butte Creek one. That was pretty well attended.
Yeah.
And the Robert Frost one was pretty well. I think there was like 17 or so. I'm just off the top of my memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one of the larger ones that we had.
I felt like we had the advantage that the school was still in session without kids.
So moving into enrollment and capacity. So we wanted to touch on this a little bit. Again, as I mentioned earlier, really to get an understanding of this a little bit and to kind of get our arms wrapped around it a little bit. You know, PSU had conducted an enrollment projection back in 2016-17, and that was, I believe, authored in 2018 was when it was put out, and projected out to 2027 for just enrollment at each individual site. And so we wanted to take a look at that, you know, because capacity, of course, will drive a lot of decision making in the long range facility planning. And so this right here, what you're seeing is just a direct reflection of what we read in the report. And so what we're seeing is at Prattam Elementary School, with a capacity of 70 to 72, it is projected to reach 72 according to the PSU report, and you'll see here in a minute what the actual enrollment is in some of these schools in 2027. So the blue is basically an indicator of when these schools, in essence, become overcapacity or nearing overcapacity. And when we say overcapacity, that includes also unhoused students. So at Silvercrest and at Silverton Middle School, where we have portables, we don't count those towards the capacity because they are not part of the built environment. Does that make sense? Richard, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, that was, the ODE doesn't want us to count those temporary structures as built as part of the capacity analysis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then and we'll get more clarity on this as we move through this, but the capacity that we're showing right here, this is based on the existing classrooms and our understanding at the moment of what programs are in those individual classrooms. So K through 4, we were targeting 20 students per classroom, whereas 5 through 8 was 25 students per classroom was the target. So there's some differences a little bit between this and the PSU. These are kind of our numbers here based on what we've seen, right, wrong, or indifferent. But this kind of just gives us a starting point to understand this a little bit.
And I was going to add, Jonah, that's another element that is valuable to the educational adequacy assessment, because we validate the floor plan that we've got it accurately labeled, and it helps fine tune the capacity.
Right.
Yeah. I have a question too. Looking at the numbers like Mark Twain and Robert Frost and those, that is strictly classrooms that would hold regular instruction teachers. What about SPED and other programs?
So the capacity analysis is based just on core curriculum. The educational adequacy begins to indicate, you know, really where you need to look at for special education programs, and they have different parameters. We could do an analysis of that, but then we have to work traditionally, that's one of the hardest because different schools have different criteria, but we could do it.
Well, I think it needs to be definitely discussed, because in places like Mark Twain, I mean, they're using the old locker rooms for counseling offices and things. So, and classrooms as sped rooms when you can't necessarily put a full class in there. So I think that definitely needs to be looked at because that number seems way off.
Yeah.
Talking about what they're at right now.
Yeah. So here's an interesting thing. The educational adequacy does address a little bit of it, but not statistical. For instance, the counseling offices in a locker room, or that is covered in the educational adequacy, and most likely it comes up, as a 0 because it's not an appropriate space. So thank you for that. We can do that. In fact, we did schedule, we do drill down on each school's special ed needs, and not statistical, but certainly we do have a list of what are some of the challenges. Thank you, Colin.
Yeah, and also to that end, our intent is to meet with Dana Peterson after we go through all the different schools, just to validate, because we're also learning during these educational adequacy, where does SLP occur, where does special education occur, counseling and things like that. So we are marking those up on plans and getting an understanding of that. So if a room has been, just for clarity on this analysis, if a room has been designated as something that's not core curriculum, it's not included in this capacity analysis. So right, wrong, or indifferent. It was kind of, we just had to sort of draw a line on that because some classrooms, like you said, are being used for smaller group instruction. And so don't necessarily, but we need those spaces, regardless in where those occur. And you'll kind of see here in a minute what are, again, just a high level where we see some of those capacity challenges there. So one thing that we wanted to look at here, again, just part of our validation efforts in looking at the PSU enrollment projections is just seeing where it was. So there's about 4 years of empirical data that we were able to extrapolate on projections versus actual. And so we kind of wanted to see just where are we with, how that enrollment parallels with the actual enrollment, and which you could see is for the most part, it's, it's certainly within the margin of error at schools. Pradham, of course, 5.8 is going to go up dramatically with just 1 or 2 students because of the size of that school. But then you see some of these highlighted in yellow, kind of the outliers that are quite a bit different than what the projections had. And I know there's a reason for this, and that's what we'd like to get to the bottom of, and getting an understanding of that. Community Roots, as an example, is quite a bit higher than what it was projected to be. Silvercrest, not quite as dramatic, but it's still an 11% delta there. Mark Twain Elementary, not too bad, 7.9%. And then Robert Frost, there was about an 8% delta based on actual and projected. So if you combine all of those together, what's really interesting is the analysis, when it was done, had projected that there was actually going to be a decrease in enrollments by now compared to 2016, 2017, whereas we actually saw an increase of about 2.4% district-wide. So that kind of gives us a difference of about 6.1% there. So this is really just for us to kind of sort of understand capacity and projecting, and this will make some sense. So if there's any, I would love for anybody to offer input in the chat bar, or if you want to talk about some of these, because we just want to get a better understanding of that. And we will have some comments coming up for that. But so what does that mean? When we look at the population, so when we did our analysis based on the existing classrooms during this educational adequacy and getting ready for those, we looked at the gross square footage of each school as we understood it from the facility assessment, and then the population, the current population of those schools, we get an understanding of what the square footage is per student at each school. So that includes gymnasium, that includes commons, that includes, you know, corridors, all that. So it just kind of gives you a sense for what schools have more square footage based on that data. We don't really know about Community Roots School as much, but you can kind of see some of them have a little bit more square footage, some of them don't, and you know, we've also indicated which ones have classrooms and portables there.
So there's a question, Jonah, about, there's a comment just that there was a perception or a belief that the PSU projections were off based on the growth of the area. So they convert those into students. And so we're using the actual data of current enrollment for this comparison compared to what PSU put together. So it's just it's related exclusively to the enrollment in the grades. The second part, which is was that there has been some concern about capacity at Mark Twain, and we just haven't gotten with them yet. So we'll keep a heads up for that.
Yeah, perfect.
Hey, Jonah.
So, yeah.
So looking at the middle school numbers here, and about 146 students over capacity, that is from those portables that aren't included in, correct? That's where those numbers are so high, are coming from, is all separate portables,
Yep.
correct?
Yep. And how many portables do you have? How many portables do you have?
I'm seeing 7 on this list, just for the middle school alone.
Yeah.
And that is the current portable count, not future portables that will be occurring on that site. But that's exactly
they're putting more portables on that site.
They are adding portables up on the site. Couple.
Thank you.
Yeah. A comment, please. On the previous slide where you had the percentages, you have to be careful. You can look at the percentages and they are, you know, somewhat similar, but you have to remember that's percent of a bigger number. And so if you look there at Mark Twain, Robert Frost, and Silverton Middle School, the projected and the actual is maybe 100 or 150 kids. So you got to worry about bodies and where you're going to put them. And as you pointed out, 7% at Pradham, well, you know, that's 3 or 4 kids. So that's a significant consideration, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, Ray. And we this chart right here, what we're kind of looking to illustrate to that end was, okay, well, if we look at the current population now, and then look at the capacity based on the classrooms that are there, and then the target enrollment per classroom, again, 20 at K4 and 25 at 5-8, you kind of get a sense for, you know, which snapshot in time, which ones are over capacity and under capacity. So currently, the way we see it and analyzed it is Pradham, Evergreen. Those are, you know, there's not really a delta there. Bethany would appear to be over capacity by about a classroom. Silvercrest and Scotts Mills, the capacity is 180 to 188 at Silvercrest, and we are it would appear as though we're under capacity there slightly, and at Scotts Mills as well. And then that we are, it looks like we're over capacity at Central Howell. And again, back to your point, Josh, that's really precipitated by the use of the portables there. So there's 2 portables there. That is very similar at Robert Frost with the 1 portable there. That's why you see a little bit of that jump up there. And then, of course, probably no big surprise, Silverton Middle School, as it currently stands, is about 6 classrooms shy of where it needs to be if you were to just look at it just purely from a capacity standpoint there. So there's about...
Looking at the net classrooms, it would appear that we are 10 classrooms over capacity between all the school districts right now. No matter how we move things around, we are 10 classrooms too many.
Right, at the K-8 level. Yep. Yeah, because what we did was we took once we started looking at this data, we took the high school out of the equation, because we're kind of looking at just K-8 now, because the high school currently can afford to have more students in it. And it seems, at least from our initial analysis, that the elementary schools and the middle school is probably where that really needs more attention there. So to further along that thought there, we looked at, okay, now if we were to back out, so this is just based on the at each individual site and how that shakes out. Now, if we look at it from, extrapolate it from a different numbers game, this is kind of a different interpretation. This is looking at it just from a K-4 standpoint and a 5-8 standpoint and saying, okay, we know that currently the population in K-4 is 1381. And so that equates to 69 classrooms, whereas at 5-8, it's 1293 currently. That equates to 52 classrooms. Again, just staying at K-8, that would show us actually needing an additional 4 classrooms from that vantage point, and how those numbers kind of shake out there. Now, when we looked at the PSU enrollment projections earlier, we saw that we saw about a 2.4% increase between 2016 and now on actual. And so this is just a numbers game at this point to look at capacity and kind of just try to get our arms wrapped around it. So if we said, okay, in another, say that trajectory stayed a straight line, for the next 10 years. Well, in 4 years, you're going to be about 2.4, 2.5% here. And so this would be, again, this doesn't account for bubble, and it's not, there's a lot of complexities that aren't factored in here. So this is just a linear diagram. We get to about 17 classrooms shy in about 4 years. Now, if we follow that out to 10 years, which would factor to about 6%. Again, if it's just a very linear number, we all know it's not linear, but if it were, this is where we'd be shy in 10 years, would be about 22 classrooms. Now, again, let's take into consideration that 10 of those classrooms are portables, right? Because there are 7 at the middle school, and then 3 at the elementary schools there. So that just kind of gives you a sense. This is just saying, okay, district-wide, what does it look like if those numbers kind of stayed on that same trajectory? And like I mentioned, this doesn't address this takes into account the students that are in portables. This also, I apologize. Okay, I was trying to remember where the four came from. And that 4 was, this takes into account also the community root school, right, wrong, or indifferent. It just looks at, the community, there are students in the district that are housed at the community root school, and are not in district-owned classrooms. And so that's where that 4 delta between the 10 and the 14 come into
So
play.
Jonah,
Does
at
that
this
make sense?
point, hey, Jonah, at this point, there's some conversation in the chat that I think Paul can address for us, which is how many kids are actually transferring in, how many kids are transferring out, and that would help reconcile or understanding these numbers a little bit better. Is that what you're planning to do, Paul?
I don't have those numbers yet on me right now, but I think what Josh Ort just typed in there, 350, that's about right in terms of the numbers of transfers in. Now, I think our transfers out are half of that, but I just don't have that data in front of me. But we are definitely a district of a destination and choice for a lot of people.
And we were looking at community roots and kind of wondering if that was part of what's going on there, not knowing anything about it. But the numbers just seem to be going up, exceeding the population projection of PSU.
Does the PSU projection take into account the fact that people can live in Silverton, but it's much more difficult to live out in EFU ground, so that most of the growth in population is going to be in the urban growth boundary rather than in the outlying areas? Does PSU projection consider that?
Yeah, I don't know the detail on that. I know that they are the recognized authority in the state, and it's been developing over the last 20 years of their program, and they've expanded it to include school districts. So we will ask that question specifically, but they are the recognized leader, and they certainly know our state fairly well. So, but Ray, we'll get back to you and answer that question.
Thank you.
It sounds so that partially explains some of this increase in enrollment that we're seeing. That's different than the PSU. Is just the desire for students to come to this school district, and so that helps clarify that.
And Jonah, you said that the community roots enrollment is counted in our district-wide enrollment?
It is in these numbers, and these numbers were just taken from the ODE website for 2019-2020. So that's where we got these population numbers, and that was included in that assessment as well. And please tell me if it should be or it should not be. I think that's part of what we want to get to the bottom of when we analyze the long range facility plan. Because that's kind of the one thing that we need clarity on. So does that make sense? Kind of how we, bumbled our way through it and getting these numbers here. So I think we've got 15 minutes left, so I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of really chew on that a little bit. Similar to what we did last time, we want to get an understanding, because this is an advisory committee that we'll be taking guidance from as we move forward. What do we think the baseline should be for evaluating capacity needs? And again, this is just capacity. This isn't taking into consideration other things, but just core capacity increases. Should we be evaluating it at its current trajectory? Should we be using the PSU enrollment numbers? Should we kind of be using the 2.4, 2.5 that we've actually seen, or the 6%, which would project out to 10 years there? And then, I think once we get, hopefully we can get some consensus on this question here, I'd like to jump into, what are some scenarios for distributing some of those additional classrooms in our long-range facility plan. Does it make sense that those classrooms are distributed evenly throughout the schools? If I were to look at, Ray, your comment about the urban growth boundary and kind of more enrollment happening inside, and the PSU does take some of that into consideration and that into account. We just don't have the exact details at the moment, but does it make sense for that capacity to be added in town? That's kind of what we want to get out of this brainstorming exercise, because we do feel as though there is going to be some capacity needs that probably should be addressed in this long-range facility plan, and probably in an ultimate bond measure, even if it was just replacement of the portables. So I guess let's maybe start with this first question, and then we'll go to this board here again, the handy dandy Miro board, to get some of that. Ooh, look at that. That looks way better than I left it, Angela. Okay. So what are our thoughts? I think we should capture the more students are being transferred into the district.
There's some chat in the chat about that being a pretty consistent over the last few years, and I think I would agree based on what I recall seeing in our enrollment data.
This is Dave Adams. I've got a comment, just some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make the point that not all of those schools, I don't think we're all in agreement on those schools being the appropriate grade configurations. So that's just one of the foundational things to factor into the discussion on some of those K through 2, K through 3 through 5 grade configurations may not be the most optimal for what the district feels, or parents and teachers alike. And so something to consider as we talk through capacities as well.
That's a really good point there, and like you said there, that does impact kind of the numbers and the bottom line of those numbers. And if we were to look at just from a district-wide standpoint, before we even got into that level of detail, what are the projected enrollment? And I think what I'm kind of hearing was that enrollment, I think we're in agreement that has been a pretty consistent increase in enrollment because of the transfers.
As far as I recall, this is Eliza, sorry. I'm pretty sure that the district like a year ago or so started to at least limit the intertransfer, like the transfers into the district. I'm not positive, but I know that out at Butte Creek, like as also inter-district transfers started to change a little bit, which Butte Creek has been seeing a falling population. We had like 320 students 3 years ago, and I think we have 289 today or something like that. So I do think that maybe some shifting of the way that students can transfer around, or changing the boundaries for some of your outer schools might be one of the things, because like Scotts Mills used to be small and now it's grown quite a lot for a small capacity school.
We do have some limits where some grade levels at some schools are closed to interdistrict transfer, and other grades are open. High school is an example where we had to shut it off because there was so many kids trying to get in. We had to just say, look, we're full at the following grade levels. Butte Creek is one right now where we are actually saying that there are some open slots.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I am looking at an old document from 2017 with the transfer data was 350 out and we had, or 200 out and 350 in. So it looks like there is a policy to keep it somewhere around that 350 number. So when you guys are talking about the years where it's been pretty consistent, it looks like that. And it looks like we're netting anywhere to 150, 180 plus coming in, mostly from that Salem Kaiser Pradham boundary.
And if I remember correctly too,
per year.
I think that the board has to kind of cap that and set that policy each year on the amount of transfers, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's correct.
Also, I also know that I talked with the previous superintendent a couple of times about the PSU projections, because it was kind of strange because, you know, this whole area has been seeing a lot of development, and yet they kept saying that we didn't have to worry about school enrollment going up. And that was because I guess the idea is that the majority of the people who are moving here are either in the retirement stages of life or also possibly so young that they're not in the family development yet. I'm not exactly sure, but I just, because we have had a lot of growth here, so I don't know if they misestimated who's coming in or where the growth is coming from, or if maybe those grandparents are bringing grandkids with them that are going into our schools or something like that.
There are other demographers that you could hire to do a separate study. So if we don't have a study that can be substantiated and supported, then we're never going to get past kind of determining if that's good information or bad information. So that might be something you want to consider, is have another demographer do a separate study.
I would just wonder if you want to just kind of like divide your percentages in between, instead of thinking 2.5% or 6%, think like 4% or 4.25 or something like that.
Yeah. So
yeah, I was kind of going there too. Split the difference, maybe. You know, that maybe 6 might be a little bit too much, and 2.5 might be a little low. Can we meet a happy medium?
Yeah. There is another
suggestion. Can I make a suggestion? Would be I assume, and maybe they're using Portland State, but the city is certainly doing some projection analyses, and if the city is projecting 12%, just for example, a crazy number, and we say no, 3%, that wouldn't make a lot of sense. It might be worth a phone call to the appropriate person and see what indeed the city is thinking.
No, that's great. Ray, do you have do you know who that person would be to talk to, the city, or?
I'm not sure. I'd start with I think I'd start with the city manager, and or director of planning and development. I think that's Jason. Somebody help.
Jason Goebel,
terrible last name.
Like Goebel? Yeah.
Peter, who I believe is in this group tonight, would know more about that, because I believe he's on multiple committees, and one of which I think is the city planning committee. Is Peter here?
He was. I saw him earlier.
Jason. Woo. Gotta get through.
Guttra-True or something. I think it's Getra-True.
Yeah. We also, something that we can do, which is a standard practice, is cohort survival. And it's math, and we can take 8 years of past enrollment and plug those numbers into the formula, and it will generate another output on growth that's based on the last 8 years, as opposed to a straight interpolation. So for the next meeting, we'll bring that in as well. And it's just another piece of analysis based on the past trends. And every school district has those last 8 years of enrollment. The downside is that it is total enrollment, so we won't be able to really distinguish between in-town schools and out-of-town schools. But it will give you an overall number that you can compare to the 2.5 or 6%.
Well, personally, I'm comfortable with using the Portland State's projections. They've, as somebody pointed out, they've been doing it for years. In fact, back in the 80s, when I was on the school board in Silverton, we used Portland State for projections. And so they are the experts. And it seems to me that if they have a number that's 2.5 or it's 3, then that's as good a number as we could come up with to use.
I think the problem, Ray, that people have lost faith in that study, though, because the district was telling everybody else that based on that study, we weren't growing and we weren't going to need any new capacity, and we already are seeing it. So that's where I kind of agree with maybe getting a new study done by somebody else.
Okay, I mean, I can't argue with you because I don't know.
Has anybody that's on here actually read through the whole PSU study? I've never actually seen it.
I'm actually reading it right now, Colin. Here's one little bullet point. There's a general belief that the school district will experience a modest total enrollment growth over the next 10 years by 6%. So they are already kind of using some of these same numbers. They did say that enrollment at one school, Butte Creek, is estimated to decrease by 9. So, I mean, it seems like these numbers are similar here. I mean, if you want me to forward you this PDF to anybody, just let me know and email me and I can get this to you.
I'd like to see it because I'm just curious, were they taking into account the other open spaces like Ray pointed out in the urban growth boundary? Because the district has said for the last 2 or 3 years that study showed that we weren't going to grow. And I just had a hard time believing that.
I read the PSU report, and I think that some of it has to do with the different schools and such different, our boundaries are so dramatically different. There's definitely a lot more growth within the boundaries of Silverton that gets your in-town schools much more densely populated.
And Paul, what's the date on the PSU report?
Off the top of my head, I want to say November 2018. But you can find
I'm looking at it right now.
in the district board book, or that whole area where the LFRP stuff is.
Yeah.
June 2017.
Yeah, 2017. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was factored into the legislation that was enacted in 2016 that allowed homeowners to petition cities for developments to allow, as in the past, getting into the city for developments had to go through a vote of the people, whereas after 2017, that people that wanted to develop land could do so by going directly to the city councils. And I don't know if that factor was factored into some of the data and the growth that we see with some of the newest and kind of in the future, some of the affordable housing and additional large tenant dwellings that have been going into different cities.
And that's just real quick before we jump to this next question here. Josh, where did you see that 6% on the, do you have a page number? You probably don't. I was curious, I didn't see that. Because that actually aligned with what we saw.
Oh man, let me look. It was in the summary in the end. There we go. How do I find a page on a PDF? 60 out of 72 out of my scanned document.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we'll take a look at that because that would align with what we're seeing, 6%. Okay. So, and just to clarify, that 6% was over 10 years is what we were looking
Correct.
at. So, and that aligns. So maybe that's kind of the baseline that we start with. And then we'll kind of work through that. We'll review the city projections with Jason as well. And then Richard, we can work on the cohort survival and take a look at that. But this really helps clarify for us some of these enrollment challenges. So I'm just doing a time check real quick here. We always get into a lot of discussion, which is perfect and exactly what we want to do, and we always end up going over. Maybe I'm just bad at facilitating these things, but we're 9:01 right now. Do we want to try and tackle this next question? What's everybody's feelings on? I want to be respectful of your time.
Well, we're going to be off all summer, right?
I agree. I think we're here. Let's keep it going.
Okay, great. So let's talk about some scenarios for distributing additional classrooms. So again, if we're just looking at it from a simple math standpoint, what are some thoughts? We heard changing boundaries to accommodate that. Some of those transfer students was a scenario. What are some other scenarios that we would like to take into consideration?
Well, I think one thing is we also have the ability to restrict transfers if we really want to, right? I mean that is an option. Not saying we want to say no to people who want to come into our district, because we've always welcomed that. But if we do get to a point we have a capacity and we have, what was it, 350 or so that come in, we can pull that lever and reduce our transfers in.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Aaron.
We don't necessarily have to build for the future for those transfers unless we want to. I'm just, trying to put that out there.
What is 6% of our current enrollment, approximately 300 student? I wasn't sure what our current enrollment is.
So 6% for K-8, when we were looking at that was, let's see here. So this is kind of what we were projecting out for 6%. So currently it's 2674 K-8, with 6%, that's 2835. So an additional.
So still be managed within that scale of transfers. Although I think that was a district total transfer, and as Paul said, that a lot of them are in the high school, not necessarily K-8.
Those 354 transfers in are not new transfers every year, correct? Those are people that have transferred in and continue to be here, and we're counting as a transfer student still? Paul, do you know?
Yes, I think
the
way you described it, I believe, is accurate. So it's not like we get a brand new set of 350 every year. It's there are 350 kids who are here in the district on transfer status.
So if the school board decides to bring in a policy of no more transfer students, we're not going to see that big of a number, because we're not going to kick the kids out, obviously.
You're right. What we would do is we would limit future enrollments or future transfers. We'd probably gradually implement that. So siblings, for example, would probably still be allowed to enter in, but for the most part, we would cut that off, and that number would slowly decrease over time.
Paul, is there anywhere or any place to see the statistics on that of, how many at the high school, how many at each school, and any of that?
I've got a worksheet on that.
I'll email
I
it to
have
you,
it right in
Colin.
front of me, Colin.
Did I send it to you, Josh?
I've got it.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, and if we can get a copy of that too, that'd be good.
How do you email? Can somebody put their email in the chat and I can just do it that way?
How about if you email it to me, Josh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can have Debbie Valawful to send it out to everybody all at once. And she may actually have an updated one. This is Debbie's actually the one who handles all of our transfer records. And so she actually may have an updated worksheet since the last time I sent it to you, Josh. So we'll get it out.
Yeah. While we're on the subject of data, we'd like to get the past 8 years of district enrollment. If you would provide us with that, would be great. If you have it by schools, that would be great, because then we could isolate in-town and out-of-town schools and kind of tell what the trends look like in these two categories. Got it. Thank you.
So Jonah, I mean, to get back to your last question, I mean, I think the two answers that are there are pretty much all you got right now, unless you talk about building new buildings.
Right.
I don't know how much
transfers.
more we can elaborate on that, except for shutting down transfers and changing boundaries, which is already starting to happen with Silvercrest.
Yeah.
Are you wanting all ideas pie in the sky or realistic ideas? Because, I mean, if we're thinking of all ideas, one could easily say changing both of the schools in town, the elementary schools in town, to K through 8. And that could add flexibility in the outer schools.
Yeah, we are certainly looking for really all the ideas, and also just would love to get some thoughts on what ideas everybody would agree with, because at the end of the day, when we look at this come fall, we will come with something to explore, and that may include additional capacity. As an example, at just Silverton Middle School. Now, is that a good idea or not a good idea? That's something that we would look for guidance from this committee on. So that could be one scenario. How is that for a scenario? Is that just the dumbest idea in the world?
Do you mean changing the elementary schools to K-8?
No, really, it's just floating a scenario. So keeping the K-8 schools as they are, from a capacity standpoint. That's not to say that you wouldn't necessarily, you may add a music room or things like that, but handling the capacity increase by increasing classroom count at Silverton Middle School. That's a scenario. Now, again, is that the right scenario? Is that a bad scenario? What are some thoughts on that one?
I'm not following you completely on that. Are you saying make the student class size bigger at Silverton Middle School, or bring in more mods?
No, I'm saying if we're looking at a long range facility plan and how do we build for the future, then that suggestion would lead you to the conclusion that we should be adding classrooms at Silverton Middle School, and so that may end up being either a significant addition to Silverton Middle School or a replacement of Silverton Middle School. So that's kind of
yeah. So then the next posted on your question on the right is a new school, or that's basically all you're saying.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yep.
I got you.
Yep.
So
and then
I was
you would handle.
reading the chat when Dave was talking, What was the thing about the town schools going to a K-8? I didn't follow that. Can you say that one again, Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, this idea has already been proposed to the school board, but the idea is current grade configurations. There has already been a work group at the two schools, the Mark Twain and Robert Frost, to talk through the feasibility of moving those instead of being independent kindergarten through second grade and third through fifth, moving them both to K through 5. And by doing that, kind of increasing the capacity to allow more capacity at both of those schools.
Yeah, sorry, I heard K-8 and it said K-8, and I was that makes sense.
So the idea was increasing. So once again, the current proposal that's been proposed to the board was K through 5. The larger idea would be, like I say, pie in the sky would be making those K through 8, which if both of the schools were K through 8 and had extra capacity, there could also be some capacity if there was some of those outlining schools had issues. Having the K through 8 in town, there would just be more options for those outer schools once they reached capacity, some possible transfers.
So you're saying to make all 3 town schools K through 8 and not have a middle school?
The 2 elementary schools was the idea.
So then you just don't use the middle school anymore? And if we're already at capacity almost at Mark Twain and Robert Frost, I mean, where are you going to put all those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders?
So that was the starting question was, are we looking at ideas that are feasible, or are you looking at all ideas? So this was not something that I'm saying is going to be an easy solution, but it was just to add to the plate as far as different ideas.
Right.
Of course, you would keep the middle school. So the next step would be, yes, you would need a new middle school with greater capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's an important clarification there, Dave. Is that these are suggestions and thoughts of not just essentially, shuffling what's there now, but it's looking at, well, okay, if as an example, we were to go K-8 at Mark Twain and Robert Frost, and that made sense, there would be some, I would think there would be some additional classrooms added at those schools.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yep.
If someone would type a pasty or note for me, I can't seem to make that part work. I think it's important that little kids not be bused very far. And that kind of means that the classrooms have to go where the kids are, but especially with those little guys. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and unfortunately, that's already sounding like it's in the works for next year because of the Pioneer subdivision with Mark Twain being near capacity for kindergartners. Any new families that move in that are moving kids in that are little kids are going to be put on a bus and sent to Silvercrest.
That's been going on for some time, yes. Yeah.
Well, it's been an option for some families, but it's going to be required now. So kindergartners will be getting, any families moving in will be required to do it.
That has not actually been decided. That is the idea that we are exploring right now, but we have not finalized that decision. And we probably will until we get further into the summer to see how enrollments look.
So, so the one thing I haven't heard yet is adding capacity at the K-8 schools, the out-of-town schools. Does that make any sense to do that? Or back to your point, Ray?
Your first word got cut off, so.
Oh.
What do you mean by adding capacity?
So if we were to look at this as a whole district-wide, bucket of classrooms that need to be added for capacity, one scenario could be adding that capacity at the K-8 schools. But I'm suspecting that that's not the right solution.
I think it's a solution that needs to be discussed definitely about maybe not a 10-year, but in a 15 to 20-year plan for sure, because those buildings we've seen are just as old and as the middle school building, and are going to just continue to have more issues.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a slightly different. I think when we talk about capacity, we're talking just about capacity. I think we'll find that the facility assessment tells there's needs at all the schools. Now, that's going to be a conversation that we'll have as well. Which facilities are past their useful life, and then what makes sense. Because at the end of the day, when we get done with this long-range facility plan and we have a recommendation to make to the board for what we believe will be a bond recommendation, we will have to prioritize. It happens every time, and the bucket of needs is always bigger than the money, the dollars that communities are willing to support or can support. So, I think I think hearing that that's probably a 15 or 20-year plan, I think makes some sense, because it seems like the more immediate need is probably at Silverton Middle School. If we were to prioritize based on need. But
I think exactly what Ray was saying earlier, that's where the growth is going to happen, is in town. You are going to have some people moving in, and you might have some small 5-acre parcels that get divided in the country at a slower rate, but there's already a ton of developments being talked about and in the plans in town. And exactly what Ray said about having to bus little kids out of town, that's the immediate need I think everybody can see.
Great.
Not to say that there's not needs at all the schools. I mean, we've seen that all obviously from the study, but when you're talking strictly room, I think that's the biggest issue.
And I just want to add in there, if we're talking about that philosophy, adding in the K through 5 and the elementary schools into that decision process with the middle school as well. Not saying it's more need, but I mean, if it's the in-town aspect that I think I wanted to highlight in your comments was spot on.
I think I may be wrong, but a couple of years ago, the city council changed the zoning on something like 25 acres south of the fire hall, west of Robert Frost. They changed that land that was some kind of an industrial zone, I believe. They changed it to R1. So once the Pioneer project is filled up, the next big
Uh-oh, looks like Ray.
Oh, we lost you, Ray.
He's frozen, man.
I do want to reiterate the importance of getting on board with the city of Silverton. When we're trying to come up with these 50-year plans of what we're going to be, or 10-year, we really need to know what the city of Silverton has going on with their plans of growth to the best of our ability. Because if we don't have that information, I feel like we may not make the best decisions.
And the state requires that, so that is part of the plan for the very reason you just described, Josh.
Has there been any discussion about getting Jason or somebody from the city to start sitting in on our meetings and having, being invited to be here and be able to answer these questions as we're going through it?
Well, that would have been great if Peter Metzka could have stuck around, because he can kind of do that.
Who's
Which
Jason?
I agree for sure, but I think it'd be, and I agree with that definitely, Eliza. It's good to have people both, but I think having an actual city employee or person that deals with the zoning on here would be fantastic.
Well, I know that the city also has the whole West Side development plan that they've been talking about and working on over this last few years. Has anybody else heard into that? But I do feel it encompasses or if I remember right, it encompasses that land and that parcel that Ray alluded to for development.
Yeah, and I think whether it's Peter or Jason, that's a really critical piece that can help bolster these efforts. We will be engaging the city, but some of our more successful planning efforts have included a city representative, every step of the way, because they understand the kind of the complexity and candidly they help with the permitting process when you get down the road for land use. Eventually when the bond passes, they understand everything that goes into it. So it's not just getting the plan, but it's also after the plan's conducted. So I think those are all really good suggestions, and we will. I know that a lot of this seems like maybe at the moment kind of rudderless, but this is really, really helpful in helping us understand how to move forward over the summer. So next steps, we'll continue to evaluate educational adequacy with the site-based committees. So we want to finish out all of those schools. We'll also determine what buildings can be classified as historic by checking the national, state, and local registries. And then we will be having this equity discussion and having our summer site visits during the summer. So we will be working through the summer and kind of understanding those needs. As far as our next meeting, we want to honor everybody's time during the summer. And so the thought was September 8th, keeping it the second Tuesday of the month. What's everybody think about that?
That's the day after Labor Day, but it's first day of school.
Probably not good for the principals.
Yeah.
So maybe the week after or the month after, or okay.
I think by the middle of September, we're good.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I have a question too, Jonah. When you're talking about your site visits this summer, have you guys talked at all with the new super, or is he planning on being involved in those? Because it'd be a good time for him to see the buildings and kind of get on board.
That's a really good thought there. We haven't had that conversation yet. But I will make that.
I've got a list of things for him, and I will add that to the list. Absolutely.
Perfect. Great. Well, we went long again. Any final thoughts before we adjourn for tonight's meeting?
I just wanted to know, would you like me to reach out to the city of Silverton to see if they have a representative who can join these long-range facility planning meetings?
I think that would be awesome, Eliza.
Okay, I'll give that an attempt.
Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for the update and the numbers. A lot of those stats make a lot more sense versus the other ones I've seen, and it's a lot clearer picture for me, kind of understanding the situation, which I mean it'll probably be a lot clearer for the community as well in making these decisions to try to get this thing taken care of. So thank you.
Absolutely. Great.
Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. I really, really want to see this group be 50 people strong when we get back together in September. These meetings, what do we have on here tonight? 2022. I hope to check in on you and hear about 50 people being involved in these meetings. So please reach out to your friends. Please reach out to your colleagues at other buildings and other parents. And the more people we get involved, the better. So thank you very much, everybody.
Paul, thank you so much for keeping.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
You guys have been awesome.
Thank you.
Very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Paul.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you guys.
Paul.
Hey, Joan, is it pretty quiet downtown?
It is. It is.
I was just
Yeah,
checking.
no,
I was just checking Oregon Live for you, and it doesn't. There's not any headlines, so that's pretty good. Yeah,
oh, there
there
we
it
go.
was. Yeah. Here's the.
Yeah.
7 hours ago was the last time they had an update. So I
Oh,
think.
really?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Well, now let me just see if I can get out of the building.
Yeah. I still have my doubts. You're going to be calling somebody. There is some there is some instructions on the back of the door,
Yeah.
but I've never had to use them. So, all right, good job. Thank you.
All right.
Night.